With barely 2 weeks to go for the November 5th presidential election, Vice President Kamala Harris has emerged as an overwhelming favorite among Indian American voters, according to a new poll. The poll conducted by Indian American Impact or IAI Fund that represents Indian and South Asian communities found that Harris has a whopping 48% lead over her Republican rival, former President Donald Trump, among Indian American voters in 5 battleground states. The poll was conducted among 600 likely Indian American voters in Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. The poll also found that Harris voters are far more motivated than Trump voters, 80% to 66%. IAI said inflation, the economy, and abortion are the main concerns in the election, even as it found that a vast majority of South Asian electorate remains firmly pro choice, with 76% saying abortion should be legal all or most of the time. Harris is also trusted more than Trump across many parameters, the poll found. There are 400,000 South Asian American voters in the 5 battleground states, according to IAI. With the election predicted to be extremely close, their preference could make a decisive difference. MCR spoke to IAI Executive Director Chintan Patel to get a perspective. Welcome to Mayank Reports. Chintan, it's a great pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having me on.
Is it a surprise or along your expectations, you're finding that Kamala Harris has a whopping 48% lead over Donald Trump among Indian American slash South Asian American voters in the 5 battleground states?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's on par with what we expect. At Indian American Impact Fund, we're an organization that over the last 10 years or so have been working to mobilize our communities to the polls and working to support Indian American and South Asian American candidates run for office up and down the ticket. And what we've seen, even leading up to this point, is that on a set of issues, the community tends to align with Democratic positions. So, for example, on issues like taxes, on a fair economy, on issues like healthcare, climate change, taking action on climate change, keeping our communities safe from gun violence, reproductive rights, democracy, voting rights. These are all issues where the community broadly aligns with the Democratic Party and aligns with the values of Vice President Harris, particularly in comparison to where former President Trump is on these issues. And that is why, we're seeing this broad, overwhelming support, nearly 50% margin of support for Vice President Harris from our communities.
One particular statistic that jumped out at me, and I mean, it shouldn't have been news to anyone coming from South Asia, that 76% of Indian Americans are pro-choice.
Yeah.
It is a hugely diverse figure from what you see otherwise among mainstream Americans, and it is a very emotive issue in this country. I mean, there are cultural reasons for why Indian Americans and South Asian Americans look at abortion differently compared to mainstream Americans. What's your sense? Why do you think it is so overwhelming even within the battleground states?
Yeah, I mean, look, I actually think our community is very much in line with sort of the broader public itself. We've seen over the last year or two since the Dobbs decision that took away women's reproductive freedoms in this country, this incredible sweeping action in every state where the issue has been put on the ballot directly to voters. We've seen overwhelming support from the entire electorate in favor of protecting reproductive freedoms, and our community is no different. Right. That is, I think, one of those preconceived notions that potentially, there is a difference. But as you said, over 70%, 76% of Indian and South Asian Americans are strongly in favor of making sure women have the right to their own, to make their own healthcare decisions that affect their bodies. I think that is pretty much in line with where the national electorate is as well.
I'm not even surprised for the simple reason that abortion is not such a big political issue in in South Asia and specifically in India. It's not something that people react to with such visceral feelings like some of the Americans do, and I suppose that partly explains your finding.
Yeah, I mean, look, it is a very much a hot button issue in the political sphere, or it's made out to be a button issue in the political sphere here. But when you look at the numbers, while a handful of justices on the Supreme Court were able to take these freedoms away, the American electorate is universally in favor of protecting reproductive freedoms, whether that's Democrats, Republicans, independents, men, women, South Asian voters, Black voters, broader A and HPI voters, Latino voters. There is a universal consensus on protecting reproductive freedoms. What we have is this small reactionary cohort that has worked to take away these freedoms. And with the vice president, we have an opportunity to fight back against that and make sure that we're restoring these freedoms once and for all by codifying Roe v. Wade.
You've mentioned about 400,000 Indian American slash South Asian American voters in these five states of Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Talk a bit about how, in such a tightly positioned race, their vote could potentially swing the election.
Yeah, look, the election, as I'm sure your viewers are following, is going to be razor thin in these states, in these battleground states. Every single one of these states, we're seeing margins that are less than 1 percentage point in the polls right now. We're expecting this to be a historically close election. And in a situation like that, where in each and every single one of these states, the South Asian American community far outnumbers the closest margin of victory. And what I mean by that is, take, for example, Georgia. In 2020, when President Biden and Vice President Harris won, they won with about 11,000 votes in the state. That was the difference that divided the two candidates. There are nearly 100,000 South Asian voters in the state of Georgia. So our community can really, if we can turn out at the levels we did in 2020 and more, continue to support Vice President Harris, we can power that margin of victory. In a place like North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Arizona, in each of these states, we have that ability. And that's what we've been focused on at Impact. We are specifically targeting and mobilizing South Asian voters because we know that if they turn out, they're going to, by a 50-point margin, they're going to vote for Vice President Harris. And in doing so, they're going to help make that margin of victory. Because we know, look, if you look at the results at this point, where we're headed, these elections in each of these states are going to be razor thin margins.
Since the rise of Prime Minister Narendra Modi in India, there has been some feeling among some people that given Trump's sort of affinity towards him, there could be some movement in his favor compared to Kamala Harris. But your survey clearly does not indicate that. And my conversations with a lot of Indian Americans say it's pretty much the same thing.
Yeah.
How do you think that's not really played out? Because a lot of the avowedly Hindu groups, even within the US, had initially thought that he's of a man, and now I'm told even they are worried about the white supremacist elements creeping into his support base.
Yeah, look, the hard reality is that there's a WhatsApp discourse that might exist that doesn't align with where the electorate really is. And we asked, to your point, we asked the question of South Asian voters in these battleground states, who do they trust more on building a strong U.S.-India partnership and relationship? We know that's a critical bilateral relationship that is going to help America and India. And what we found is that by a 2-to-1 margin, voters in our community trust Vice President Harris to build a stronger relationship. And it's no surprise when you sort of take a look beyond the bravado that what former President Trump is promising to do in his Project 2025. If you take a close look, he's promising to denaturalize our families. He is no friend of India. He is no friend of Indian Americans. He's no friend of South Asian Americans. He has a plan that will specifically target naturalized citizens and their kids. So, take, for example, myself. I was born in India. I moved to the States when I was 8 years old. I'm a naturalized citizen. He would target me, right? And I think what our communities are realizing, and why they're not falling for his bravado, is that they know that, under his administration, we will not be safer here in America. We will not be more secure. We will not be more prosperous. Whereas on the other end, we have a candidate who, is influenced by her upbringing, who's influenced by her heritage. She has, been able to put out policy agendas that are going to specifically help our families. She talked about how her mother and influenced so much of her upbringing and her values, and then her experience taking care of her mother is what led to her putting out the caregivers agenda, which is specifically aimed at helping all Americans. But, more often than not, Asian Americans, Indian Americans, South Asian Americans, we experience the sort of sandwich generation where we're taking care of our elders and young kids at the same time. And that puts this undue financial strain, emotional strain on our families. Well, she has a direct plan to help our families address that. So that is something, is born out of her lived experience. And that's why it's so important to have representation.
On a somewhat separate subject, for a while there were misgivings within the community about the Democratic Party's sort of focus on human rights, especially from the likes of Pramila Jayapal, for instance. And they were concerned that the Democratic Party may not be favorably inclined when it comes to issues like Kashmir. Although Indian Americans live here and their entire lives are here, they still think about what's going on back home. And that, for a while, a lot of people thought that it might influence the way 2024 election may pan out. But your findings clearly belie that.
Yeah, like I said, I think the community is incredibly motivated and excited about the opportunity to elect the vice president. And yes, part of it has to do about the historic first. She would be the first Indian American president in the United States of America. And representation matters. I mean, when we look to our TV screens and see someone who looks like us, that helps us feel seen. That helps us feel that the American dream is something that is achievable for not just ourselves, our kids, or future generations. So, I think that is an important piece of it that is really exciting our community to go out there and vote for her. But more than that, it's also about how she's going to help our families, how her agenda, her path forward is going to build an economy that works for us. Her specific policies, tax policies, policies to help small business owners, which are the lifeblood of South Asian Americans. It's how we have mobility up, are going to directly help our communities. Her policies on healthcare and access to affordable prescription drugs, particularly insulin, right? Take diabetes, for example. South Asians are more impacted by diabetes than other ethnic groups. So being able to have support that helps our families, that's why you're seeing our community react more favorably to her agenda, her values, and her vision for what America can look like. And we're seeing historic support for her.
2 weeks from now, what is your expectations sitting on the perch that you're sitting on, and you're constantly in touch with people across the country? What's your sense? Do you think she'll make it, or it's still touch and go?
Yeah, look, this is going to come down to the wire. Every single vote is going to matter. There's no way to sugarcoat this. This election is very close, particularly in the battleground states that are going to decide who gets to 270 electoral votes. And that is why at Impact, we're, all gas, no brakes. We're specifically targeting South Asian voters in these battleground states, because we know our community can power this victory, right? So it's not just an opportunity to elect the first South Asian president, but it's also an opportunity for our community to do it on the power of our vote, to make sure our voice is heard at the ballot box, and that we can, choose a country of future that helps our families and our kids. And that's what it's going to take. So I expect to be incredibly close, but I expect the vice president to win in 2 weeks.
Precisely because it's going to be that close, do you fear that President Trump's obsession with the idea that all elections which are not won by him are rigged? Do you think he's going to go away easily even if he loses?
Look, former President Trump is going to do what he's going to do. I think what's incumbent on all of us to make sure that we put in the work now to make sure that we prevent a second Trump presidency, because we know a second Trump presidency is a threat to our communities. It's a threat to all Americans. What comes after that, we will be ready. We'll be vigilant in terms of making sure that the reign of division and terror that he has inflicted upon us ends. We have to make sure on the other end of this election that Trump does not hold this power, this continued ability to divide the country anymore. We have to get the vice president elected and then continue to build a stronger tomorrow.
To wrap up, Chintan, tell me a bit about the IAI. I'm rather curious at the kind of work that you do, and obviously you've been very active, going by what I was reading on your website. Tell me a bit about IAI.
Yeah, so Indian American Impact, we're an organization that started back in 2016 with sort of two core missions. One, to increase representation for Indian and South Asian American candidates up and down the ballot. So not just federal offices, but all across the country, up and down the ballot. When the organization started, there were less than 50 elected officials across the country. We have over 300 elected officials now. Obviously, the vice president. We have 5 members of the United States Congress. We have nearly 50 members in the state legislature, countless members, school board, city council, county commissioners, etc. But our mission is to support these candidates as they're stepping up, running for the first time, to help give them the resources, the network to build a strong foundation for the campaign and win. And then the other core mission is to help increase engagement and participation from our community in the electoral and civic space. So that's not simply expanding the number of voters that go out and vote and increasing our voter turnout, though that is a critical part. But it's also making sure we're making government accessible to our constituents, to our voters, making sure that they have the skills, the tools, they feel confident in engaging their local elected officials, engaging their state elected officials, engaging their federally elected officials, being able to have their voice heard, advocate for policies and issues that impact their communities. So that's our focus. We've been building towards this moment. We have this opportunity, obviously, to elect the first Indian American president this year, but we also have an opportunity to expand our membership in Congress from 5 to 7, increase it by 40%. We have 2 candidates running. One is Suhas Subramanian in Virginia's 10th congressional district, and Dr. Amish Shah in Arizona's 1st congressional district. We also have countless candidates who are running down ballot as well in their state legislative seats. Anna Thomas in Pennsylvania, Anand Patel in Pennsylvania, Darshana Patel in California, Ashwin Ramaswamy is running for state senate in Georgia. So we're all over the country this year, trying to not only mobilize our voters to turn out and vote so that they can power the victory for our candidates, but also support these incredible candidates who are going to, in addition to the vice president, who are going to build a bench of incredible candidates who are coming up the ranks over the years to come.
On that note, Chintan, I want to thank you for your time. It was wonderful to talk to you.